Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, which is Navigating Through Turbulent Times, presented by the Ontario Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade. My name is Allison Mitchell, and I'm part of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce team. Before we start our webinar, there are a few housekeeping items that I would like to go through. Your microphone should be muted at this point, but if you could please double check to reduce background noise, we would appreciate it. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar, and you can do so by typing questions into the questions box in your control panel. At the end of the presentation, our presenter will be answering your questions. After the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email that will have a link to this webinar recording, as well as an additional resource that will be referenced in this presentation. Our presenter today is Stephen Karpenko. Stephen is a senior business advisor with the Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade. Stephen has over 15 years of experience working with small and medium-sized businesses on leaning their operations and managing through challenging financial times. The COVID-19 crisis has created circumstances that none of us could have imagined a year ago. In this presentation today, Stephen will present some practical advice and provides focus on the key challenges of managing through the turbulent times. I would now like to invite Stephen to begin his presentation.
Thank you very much, Allison, and really glad to be here, and thanks everyone for joining. It's, as Allison said, a challenging time, but at the same time, I think we're starting to get a sense of turning the corner a little bit, and let's start planning now for what that future may bring. I think there's some things that'll probably be with us on a permanent basis that will impact business practices and business models and stuff. And then there are some things that'll be a little bit of getting back to normal. And let's take this opportunity, take advantage of this time to think about those things and how business can be improved. And the structure that I'm going to take, as you can see in the agenda, is well, this basically, the first step is having that skill of kind of diagnosing what the situation is. We'll talk a little bit about today's climate, and then identify the challenges and then how to deal with them. And what I'll do is I have kind of a checklist of multiple things, but I'm really going to focus on things and actions you can take today. So coming back to what Allison was saying about practical advice. So I'm really going to focus on actionable things, and if you can take away 1, 2, or maybe even 3 ideas or nuggets of information that you can apply immediately, they will make a difference. So let's get started. So the first thing is just setting the stage in terms of today's environment. 6 months ago, these were the challenges in front of us. There are many. We say the only thing that the norm is change, and that's the same thing today. It's going to be the same thing tomorrow, and it's changes on many fronts. Globalization, if you're an exporter, if you're thinking of exporting, just the competition in markets. Things like speed of innovation is a factor, what your customers are expecting and their changing preferences, the stability of financial markets, etc. Consolidation and closing of businesses, we don't usually think of, it's like, well, maybe it's not my business, but it could be a supplier or a preferred customer, and you don't really know what their circumstances are. Next thing you know, they're not around anymore. So that's even a factor. And of course, attracting and retaining talent, i.e. your staff, depending on what industry you're in, requires higher or lower skill levels. But it seems to be universal that regardless of the industry that companies are operating in these days, that attracting and retaining talent and staff is a challenge. And although today we're kind of shocked by the levels of unemployment or furloughs that have had to take place to get us through the current crisis, that will come back, and we'll have that challenge still of just having those key employees. And we know how important people are to the day-to-day operation of the business. New business models will emerge, and here's a few that are just kind of hot off the presses. The top left is a drive-through grocery delivery where literally there's a separation of people and product and customer, physical separation. So those new norms around social and work distancing being implemented And of course, this will take a little bit of time, but when you think of the three or four things I'll show you, they're not that far off in terms of the implementation, i.e. they're not dependent on some sort of innovation that doesn't exist. It's really just deploying other ideas we've had. So conveyor belts and drive-through and different ways of stacking and integrating the people, the product, and the distribution are all kind of around us. But so that would be a new business model for the grocery industry. You see the new alignment of seats on a plane or in a waiting area where instead of everything being in rows, it's set up so that people have distance between them. And maybe the benefit of that coming out will be we'll have bigger seats again instead of being all crushed into economy class. We'll see. On the bottom right, robotics. I think we were getting accustomed to hearing about and seeing robotics in things like automotive plants and fairly repetitive tasks. But the reality is the new social norm around that, it seems to be gravitating towards getting things done without people. And as weird as that may seem for us, it could be, and I know for a fact, more robotics type companies coming online, which will mean more specialized type of applications. And there's not just the physical robotics, but also artificial intelligence, AI, and using computer software to do kind of routine administrative and information-driven tasks. So that's a form of automation as well. So these are all kind of like things that were in existence before, but really the COVID-19 crisis is putting them kind of onto the front burner and accelerating the pace of change. Let's take the pulse and just get a feel for what I mean by that. Early warning signs. So when you're running your business, one of the things that you're looking for and you kind of get a sense for, a radar, are the things that are always happening external, i.e. you don't necessarily have control over them, but they can impact our business. And here's a kind of a list of, I would say, more or less the key ones. And you can ignore them, and I think that's the learning from this slide is that tighter banking controls, the level of competition that you're facing, the state of your margins on your income statements, supply chain issues, the economy itself. These are all things that are just happening and will happen whether you're paying attention or not. And so you can kind of choose to ignore them or not have a system for tracking the important stuff that could potentially impact your business, but you do that at your peril. So one of the things you may be, and by the way, obviously COVID-19 was not something anyone could have planned for. I don't think anyone could have planned for the impact of the oil price shocks that we've experienced in terms of the impact on the oil distribution market. Nobody could have anticipated that. Those are things that literally came out of the blue. But there are a whole bunch of things that are kind of indicators of hey, maybe things aren't going as well as I thought they were. So the first thing is just being aware of the external signs. And here's an example with economic trends. And the thing here is that the writing was kind of on the wall already in Q4 of 2019 that we were about to experience some kind of economic slowdown or maybe even recession in early to mid 2020, and that was independent of COVID or maybe not so much the oil. I mean, there was something going on there, but what I've got here is a chart showing the difference in labor productivity. So we kind of caught up to the U.S. in terms of factory productivity and kind of the more general measure of it through the mid like 2015, 2017, but towards the latter part and 2019, the US started to separate again, and there's been a lot of technology evolution that's happened, and in Canada we've been a little bit slow to adopt a lot of new technologies, and I think that was starting to show itself in terms of productivity. So that would have been an economic factor. Another one on the right hand side or just GDP or revenue profitability changes on an industry basis. You can see on the left-hand side, not everything was perfect. There was some stuff going on in manufacturing and utilities that could have been an indicator of a slowdown into 2020. So it's possible that many of your businesses were already kind of making plans for a slowdown. of course, what we're experiencing now just really accelerated all of that, and to a greater degree. Let's take a pulse of what's happening right now. Here are survey results from literally this week. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business did a national and Ontario survey of what's going on. I thought this would be important for everyone out there in the audience, just to say, feel like, hey, you're not alone, and where are we and where might this be going? And the thing here is that if you look at companies that are fully open or partially open, it actually represents 67% of businesses, which to me, I was pleasantly surprised by that number. I thought it would have been lower, just looking at the streets kind of being deserted and whatnot. That actually there is some economic activity, that there's a pulse there, and it's a strong pulse. And as we turn the corner in the next 2 to 4 to 6 weeks, that I'm more hopeful that things will come back more quickly and strongly than we might have thought, say, 3 weeks ago. So 67% are fully or partially open. And nationally, that figure jumps to 72%. So 50% partially open and 22% fully open. So nationally, we've we're not, maybe we're not in such bad shape. And another interesting question was the main reason your business was fully closed, and only 19%, which is the second bar from the bottom, said that it was for a lack of demand for products and services. So when you put these two things together, to me, again, taking the pulse, the first thing says that the competition's still out there. So even though we've had a lot of kind of shutdowns and slowdowns of businesses, of that 67 to 72%, they're kind of ready to go. And so if you're in a competitive market, or say 6 months ago, the competition was kind of nipping at your heels, they're still out there. And that's my takeaway from that. And in terms of the closing, only 19% closing because of lack of customer demand, that to me suggests the customers are still out there. It's just a matter of like, how do we reach them, given social distancing, given virtual communications instead of interpersonal, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the macro environment. The next thing is having a real handle on your own key performance indicators. And this is like, now we're getting more from the maybe quarterly picture and coming to the literally monthly picture, maybe even weekly and day by day, which is, do you know how these key performance indicators are behaving in your company? I.e., do you know how much cash you have in the bank? Do you know if you'll have cash to pay your bills 10 days from now? Do you know what your kind of market positioning is, your accounts receivable levels? Are you in touch in terms of communication with staff to know how morale is? Paying your own bills, your P&L, income statement, are you making or losing money, your state of inventory? These are really the 10 key performance indicators that are measurable by any company, not necessarily with just QuickBooks, maybe QuickBooks plus a spreadsheet or two to track the data. But when you think about managing or navigating through turbulent times, such an important part of it is to know what your normal state of business is, where the trend was, and then when you get impacted by something like what we're going through now, or maybe something milder like a recession, that you can have a good feel for what the impact might be. And so that translates into a dashboard, and I call this your company's risk temperature, where you go from kind of green lights from revenue and profit growth through to the warning signals of shrinking revenue, shrinking profits, increasing debt, so borrowing in order to cover over a slow period or a couple slow periods, and then through to losses, and then the bottom one, no borrowing, leverage, missed payments, where you're actually starting to have problems with your banks and your suppliers, which literally is kind of the last thing before you got to shut your door. And so just having a feel for that risk temperature. And in today's environment, I hope that everyone is, and I'll get to this, but I hope that everyone's taking advantage of the government programs and the cash that is they're trying to open up in terms of helping you maybe bridge those gaps and not fall into a permanent state of kind of the yellow and red, but making sure that it's temporary and that when we come back, your business can come back with it. So identifying the challenges, let's get into the things that you could literally address today. And I'll take them piece by piece, so marketing, sales, distribution, etc. So when you think of your marketing, the top three questions there, so an area of the green box means things that you could address literally today. And the first one, clear market positioning. So do you and your customers, and to somebody who was walking by your business on the street, or do they know what your specialty is, or what your clear advantage is in the marketplace? And if they don't, is there something you can do right now to put that front and center, like we sell auto parts, or we implement websites, or something just that's simple and clear, so that your customers know, and if you're open for business, they know you're open for business, and that you're letting them know the thing that you do best, and that those are the orders that you can take today. Second thing is, are you filling today's orders? I.e., if you're able to, if you're into production or you have a manufacturing facility, are you really focused on what your orders are today? And that translates into the third thing, which is excellent levels of customer service. So making sure that those orders you have now, and today it's Thursday, tomorrow Friday, to make sure that the orders that you're fulfilling are not only done in a timely basis, but that the quality is there, and that the customer service aspect of it, delivery, if there's a return, if there's a problem, if there's a phone call, that literally in today's environment, you're treating every single order, every customer like gold, like the last customer. And so that's really where your focus should be with marketing. And now there are other things like, do you solicit customer input? Do you know your customer satisfaction level? They're important, the rest of the things on the list, but they're not things you can just do today. Let's keep the focus on the things that are critical, important, and actionable. And here's a couple things just in my neighborhood. I took these two pictures out for a walk in the evening yesterday within one block. On the left is a music store. They've got their web presence up and running, and on the right-hand side is a pub, and they do takeout food. And they've kind of put signs just literally pounded into the ground along the sidewalk. So these are both businesses that have kind of taken action and put their business front and center and through online. And it's not for everyone, but if there is an opportunity, I would say that using the options that are here, whether it's a combination of WordPress and WooCommerce and Bluehost or Shopify, that literally you can get something up and running with the right help. This may not be your area of expertise, but maybe somebody who's working for you, and you don't even know that they have the skill, but putting something together in one weekend and a couple $100, just really to have an order taking capability from your loyal customers. A year and a half ago, we were thinking about e-commerce being something where we're on Amazon, and maybe we're going to start exporting to Europe or even China. Pulling back from that, saying, what can I do today is I can put something on the web so that when my customer is shopping from their computer, they can give me an order, how I fulfill it, the boxing and the packing and all that, what happens behind in the four walls of the business. Nobody really is concerned about that. What they want is that order they put in gets shipped to them in a timely fashion and in a form that they expect, i.e. it arrives in good shape. And that's it. And that's kind of like the e-commerce action that we can take today. When you think of competition, you can assess your pricing right now. And that may be something that you've been thinking about, but really are your prices competitive? Maybe there's some inventory that you could get rid of at a discount. Can you reach out and do that? So you can evaluate that right away. Are you exceeding your competition in your customer's view? Now, I realize everyone doesn't know what every competitor does, but are you doing your best in terms of pre and post purchase in order that you can position yourself with the competition? And the third thing is, can you utilize idle talent? So maybe jobs have maybe changed over the last couple, 3 months, where somebody else can do different jobs, and I'm sure everyone's exploring that. But the example I've given here on the right is at Whole Foods Market, where and every supermarket should be doing this, and I think they are, but I'll give you my example, is that at Whole Foods, when you walk in, the carts are being sanitized by somebody who's kind of right there, and the sanitized carts are on the left, and the used carts are on the right. Perfect. But when I went into Loblaws, what I saw was baskets and carts that were just kind of sitting by the door, and I didn't know if they had been cleaned. There was nobody there to say so. There was no signage. So that to me is an example where through redeploying some staff, that Whole Foods is clearly differentiating itself from Loblaws, and that's something they could have implemented literally overnight with some sanitizer and some wipes. In terms of sales, a little bit trickier, right? Because you're kind of been thrust into this situation, but it might be a time to reflect on your sales and customer base right now, and the challenge is to go from, what am I going to do tomorrow in terms of sales? I can barely keep the lights on. Well, it is an opportunity to pick up the phone or to, and I'd like to say get out and go visit customers, but of course that wouldn't happen except through the phone or through online communication. But when you look at your customer base, is there more than one customer that represents a significant part of your volume? I.e., is there a chance to diversify your customer base, or maybe there's something you've been selling to one sector and you're thinking, hey, you know what, I wonder if I could sell this somewhere else. Now is a great time to kind of get on that, and the time spent cold calling or the time spent reaching out, I mean, it's more challenging because people are maybe less receptive on the other end, but the downside is lower than when things are going really well. You can take those chances. If the rejection rate is twice as high, you know what, that's okay, because that's what you got to do right now. And so I think it's a great opportunity in terms of sales to look at your customer base and to get out there and try and sell somewhere else. And of course, finance, I kind of left this one to close to the end, but cash flow is everything. And do you have a feel for what bills need to be paid today, what needs to be paid tomorrow, what cash is coming in, what cash is going out? I suspect that now most people do because it's so critical, but cash is king always, and having a handle on that cash position and having somebody internally who's monitoring it, having that discipline in-house, knowing what the gross margins are for your top products and customers, i.e., I've got a great customer, but because they're so great, I have to give them these discounts. And when I factor in the high service costs related to inbound calling and whatnot, that maybe I'm actually not making that much money on them. And it's a great opportunity to kind of go through and find out what go back into that data a little bit and find out who your top customers are in terms of profitability, not necessarily sales volume. And also, same thing with products. Do you know the margins on each of your products? Number 3 is rent too high given the current situation. Landlords, in my experience, they're tough, and if you can't pay rent, they don't really they're not too concerned about kind of shutting you down, if you will, or finding another tenant. But in today's environment, it might actually be a great time to negotiate your rent. We read about in the papers about tenants in apartment buildings and whatnot, and maybe it's a great time to renegotiate with the landlord because they're receptive to it. And it's not going to be an opportunity there forever. But when things in today's situation, we can do that. And the other is taking advantage of government programs. What we've done is given Allison a really great 8-page detailed briefing on all the different government programs. So anyone out there who hasn't had a chance to really get into them, and we see on the surveys that the perception is sometimes that there's too much paperwork or it's too challenging. Well, that might be an opportunity to get some help from somebody in your company who hasn't been doing too much, and maybe there's some extra cycles there where they can follow through with those government funding applications, because there is a lot of help being offered, and I understand that sometimes it's just not there for you, or you feel that way, but certainly worth investigating. And in the slide deck, I've also got links to all the different programs for you as well, so you'll get a copy of the slides after. And management information is another thing. So your monthly financial statements, creating your budget, spending some time on that right now, and again, coming back to what's actionable today, or that these are things that you can get on. And if you haven't got a budget and you haven't been really good about getting your finances up to date, now's a great time to do it, because not only will it help you through the next little while, but it'll also set that discipline in place for the future and when it can really come in handy. And at the bottom, I've got a link to a benchmarking data service. It's the federal government collects all these tax returns, obviously from businesses. They actually maintain databases of different groupings of companies. So you can go onto this site and literally say, based on my NAICS code or my industry classification code, how are all of my peer companies doing? So companies or businesses like mine, let's say from $0 to $5 million in revenue, they survey thousands of companies and aggregate the financial performance of the companies into a benchmarking balance sheet and profit and loss statement. And you can use these numbers to compare yourself to your peers. It's really an amazing budgeting tool and giving you a sense for what's going on and what's possible in terms of operating performance. So making the repairs, turning it around. The first thing is to set a goal and communicate that with the team. And I know it sounds sort of corny about setting a goal. It's pretty obvious what turnaround and the environment we're in. But sometimes it's the most powerful thing to just get everyone on the same page and just to commit to, hey, we're going to see this thing through. We're going to work a little extra if we have to, and we're going to see it through the tough time, and then we're going to celebrate together when we get to the other side. That's really the power of the goal setting. Reduce your expectations. That you set a goal and then you kind of don't set your expectations too high because you got to keep going. But seize opportunities where you can, and then really focus on survival. And here's an action agenda. And I would say that these 8 things really summarize everything, which is looking at your commitments to your suppliers and what you owe them, the accounts payable side, eliminating waste, and I'll just go into that in a little bit. Your cash flow planner, which I already discussed, communicating with your customers in terms of what can you do for them now? Is there anything extra that they might need? They may request a price concession or a smaller order than normal. Can you do that? Reorganizing your staff. So if there are jobs that aren't as viable or critical right now, what else can they do? Find out what everyone's skill sets are, and maybe there's something you can do in terms of those budgeting tasks or doing something online, ordering, that can put people back to work. Involving staff in decisions, the communication side of it, finding new customers, we touched on the sales, and of course communicating with your bankers or other financial partners, whether it's your chartered bank for your checking account or business development bank for loans, that make sure you have that communication line open and that you're kind of at the top of their list so that they can help you. Coming back to waste, when I talk about lean operations, if you're not already doing this, here's kind of a checklist or a guideline of just different areas to look for waste in your operation, and not just for today so that you can maybe squeeze out and reduce your expenses slightly, but long term, can you reorganize around new processes or ways of doing things that reduce movement, maybe lower the amount of labor input that's required to do a task, better inventory management, better consolidation of orders for transportation purposes, etc. Just really getting proactive and digging into areas of waste and saving every scrap that you can in every area that you can. And then asking your team really to help you with finding that. Of course, focus on people, focusing on the staff, the goal, and creating a success challenge. Like, what does success look like? We're all in. Let's challenge ourselves. And what does your challenge look like in your business? Focusing on the strengths of people and finding hidden talents. Now maybe you're thinking, okay, I will put that website up this weekend, but I don't know who can help me. you never know. Like sometimes you have a person working on your staff who on the weekend they help their sister with a web project or with social media marketing, and they have all this sort of talent that you weren't even aware of. Maybe you can put that to work in your own business, but it really requires you to find out. And of course, the atmosphere of cooperation and flexibility. So just wrapping up, the key success factors, if you were to put all this together, the first thing is cash generation and really having a pulse on the receivables and payables side and knowing what's coming in and what's coming out, and don't get surprised or caught flat-footed by a cash shortage that isn't planned. It's ultra critical, and if you have that information, it really makes for better conversation with a lender. It makes you maybe feel more comfortable if you have to tap into a line of credit in order to uh, kind of bridge the financial gap. But it starts with that cash flow planner and literally writing in sources of cash and uses of cash on a weekly or even daily basis, monthly basis, so that you're not surprised by anything. In terms of your profit margin, finding those sources of waste, keeping things lean, keeping inventory levels low, maximizing inventory turnover, avoiding inventory obsolescence, looking at every expense item. We've just come out of a pretty prosperous time, and it's possible that these weren't the highest priorities of business, say 2-3 years ago. But in a turnaround situation, if we can focus on those top three items, that's really the expense reduction and cash management side of it. And then the bottom two are more about the revenue growth. And I would say that they're the secondary priority. All five of these are high priority, but the first three are kind of the critical must-do top priorities. And then once you've got a handle on that, it's time to turn the tap on a little bit and start looking at your sales situation. How can you squeeze more out of more calls or more productivity in terms of what your selling process? If you're an online business, how do you leverage social media communications, your network to drive sales? And the customer part is really understanding your customer, what drives them, what are their preferences, is there anything you could be doing that you're not doing? And so all of these key success factors have a turnaround component of something we can do today. And like I said at the beginning, even if it's only one thing or two things or even three that you can take away from a half hour investment of your time today, it's going to pay off not just in the next 2 to 6 weeks, but it's going to pay off for the next bunch of years, because you're just going to get motivated to do more of it. So in closing, here's a quote from the U.S. entrepreneur Mark Cuban. I have no doubt in my mind that in 5 years or 10 years, we'll look back and there will be 25 or 50 companies that started out of the pandemic of 2020 that are just amazing and world changing. And I'm a great believer in that and the entrepreneurial spirit. And it's kind of like that, setting that short-term goal, getting everyone on side, getting through it. And who knows what we're going to come out on the other side, because with change comes opportunity. We just have to be there in order to take advantage of it and celebrate it. So that's it for my overview. I hope that you really got something out of it, but I think it's now, Allison, the time to open for questions, and hopefully people there are some questions, and I'm happy to follow through with that.
Great, thanks so much, Stephen. So yeah, like Stephen mentioned, if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them into the questions box, and we will ask them of Stephen. Perhaps, Stephen, you could start by just telling us a little bit about, in terms of the work that you're doing in supporting businesses right now, what are the top questions that you're getting from businesses, or what are the top challenges that you are hearing from businesses?
That's a great question. I mean, the work that we primarily do is less the day-to-day advisory and more up until now, literally the biggest thing has been growth challenges, and the recurring themes are accessing skilled people to help. So when we were looking at, say, the automotive industry in Windsor, Essex, generally the region has gone through some tough times in the automotive sector, but for the businesses who've been successful and have kind of leaned up and gone through like the lean process and done everything they can to do a lot of the things that I mentioned in the slides, their number one challenge that kind of bubbles to the top is getting people and retaining people to fulfill the orders that they already have. That's one thing. Exporting, so taking advantage of the agreements that we have in place, the trade agreements with Europe and Southeast Asia and the new NAFTA agreement with the U.S. I mean, that up until just recently has been a major thing. So again, it's along the lines of business expansion, and we've seen so much change now in the last, say, 6 to 12 months with the kind of the trade war with China and the battleground over 5G and now COVID, and it's just like throwing kind of everything into disarray that way. But you know, when you turn the clock back, and we're going to turn the clock forward, trade and talent are big things. Just local support in smaller regional markets. So things, you know, business is very good, let's say in Toronto in the financial sector and in the tech sector. But when you get into Peterborough and the outlying regions, we'll look at it through a regional lens and see that there are definitely disparities in terms of the kind of the haves and the have-nots in terms of business and economic opportunities. So those are probably my top three, but Raphael might want to chime in on that one.
Raphael, did you want to add anything?
Well, one thing that additionally, so sorry to introduce myself. I'm Rafael Vargas. I'm a colleague with Stephen, and I work at the same at the Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade with the Business and Partnership and Programs Division. One thing that I would like to add, something that you mentioned, Stephen, it's now with the Free Trade Agreement, US, Canada, and Mexico, the CUSMA, it's finally, or it's in the final approval stages. Basically, right now, the CUSMA and the NAFTA, or what they call it, the three countries are required to notify each other that they have the complete internal process or procedures that they have. And now all the parties have to provide this notification, with the US providing the final notification on April the 24th, and Mexico and Canada, they provide the notification on April 2nd and 3rd, respectively. So it's great opportunities now. There is some changes with CUSMA. And something what we definitely like to do with the businesses is helping now only evolving in these difficult times, but helping those businesses get them ready to export. It's a big market right across the border, 380 million people. I know they're going through tough times right now, but it's our main trade partner. So yeah, it's something that we definitely encourage those businesses get into, like starting the wheel to move. And then of course, there is some great opportunities locally. I don't know, Stephen, you would like to mention about the support programs and the, you mentioned that some of the programs that you already have, but one of them that is very interested is the Launch of Ontario Together port. You will have access to the information with the slides, with the deck that we're going to provide, but it's this new website that basically enables Ontario manufacturers to redeploy or adjust their manufacturing facility towards the production of essential equipment. Like right now they needed like ventilators or masks or swabs or any other thing that will be provide barriers for business or for people in these difficult times. I don't know if you want to add something else, Stephen, to this or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, so the Ontario Together Fund that Raphael was referring to is something that I've been working on, and that's kind of like companies that can help out, like Raphael was saying, like uh, if you have a manufacturing facility, maybe producing some sort of personal protective equipment, face shields, gloves, masks, hand sanitizer. There are also many companies who are stepping forward if with mental health support, stress relief, that kind of thing. And so we have a fund for that, and it's really to get everyone through the crisis, because the reality is that as much as we know sort of what the needs are today, going back to earlier in the presentation, we talked about how the stuff's impacted us long term, is that we need huge global inventories of all this stuff. And so any company anywhere can, via the Ontario Together Fund, the government not only has an opportunity to support businesses with funding, and I think it's about a $50 million fund, but also, even if you're not looking for funding, the government will procure on behalf of not just Canada, but I think it'll probably evolve even beyond that, where if you identify yourself as saying, hey, I don't need any money, but I actually I can do this stuff and produce this stuff. Can you help me find the market? That's another part of it. So it's kind of unique that way, but really focused around the COVID-19 needs. I think beyond, one thing that prior to the crisis that we were on to big time was technology adoption. And if you're a manufacturer, adopting tech in terms of robotics, in terms of putting sensors in your plant, managing things from kind of a data perspective, and improved operational technology in order to be more precise in terms of production, inventory control, and delivery. So the tech adoption side of manufacturing, and then on the service side, one of the opportunities that we saw coming was for service businesses, like let's say it could be accounting, financial advising, many different areas, is the advent of adopting artificial intelligence and kind of robo-based ways of doing some of the more mundane tasks in the various offices, so that AI isn't just this big kind of big bank type of thing, but it also trickles down to Main Street, where a company might be able to, or a professional might be able to do more with less, just by adopting different technologies for different tasks. So we saw that the tech adoption as being also something that was up and coming.
Okay, great, thank you. I don't see any other questions, but maybe you could just maybe wrap up by telling us if there's anybody who's interested in reaching out to get some assistance, how they might go about doing that.
Well, I would say go through Allison and the Chamber of Commerce, and as a primary way, but Raphael and myself and our team, we are here to help businesses. We have different resources in place in terms of if you're a small business, if you're medium size, we have different kind of units within the ministry that can assist you with exporting, with maybe even attracting foreign buyers for your products, with helping you with any kind of the tasks that I mentioned in the presentation. So we're really here to support, and every company's case is kind of unique, but we definitely have the ability to step in and help with providing advice and expertise in many different areas.
Great, well, thank you so much. I would like to thank you, Stephen, and you, Raphael, for being with us today and sharing your time and expertise to help the business community through this difficult time. To the attendees, as I mentioned, you will receive a follow-up email. There will be a link to this webinar recording, as well as a couple of other resources, including the slide deck for your reference. Please have a look at our website, as we have a number of upcoming webinars that you are free to attend if you'd like. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.